Welcome to the Space for It with Makayla and Jacob. We are two therapists working to navigate making space for what comes up as part of the human experience. And today, we are going to be talking about being open to experiences and how our level of openness to what we're experiencing or to things that we're trying can impact our experience with that thing. But before we get into that, I do want to say something very exciting. Makayla got engaged in the last month. So if you're here and you're listening, just put congratulations in the comments for Makayla and Hardy. So,
Thank you.
yeah. On that note, I'm curious. You were the one who came up with this topic, and I would love to hear what brought it to mind.
So as I've been working with clients recently, I've been just pondering, reflecting on what is helpful for them. How and what can I bring in to help them facilitate these changes in their lives? And so it got me reflecting on things that have been helpful for me, making changes in my life, or what's been impactful for me. And some of those things are, maybe it's a quote or a proverb or a story or a book that opens my mind in a new way. And it got me thinking of why does that work for some people? And those kinds of things can be really powerful and impactful for some people and not for other people. And just what is this mechanism of change? How do we facilitate it? How do we enhance it, or even talk about it? Yeah.
I'm curious, right off the bat, would you say that you as a person tend to be open to input, open to experiencing things and changing as a result?
I would say that about myself now. I don't think I was that way my whole life, necessarily. I think I had a lot more rigidity and a lot more closed-mindedness to certain things. And though one of the characteristics that does come to mind that I do feel like has been part of me for most of my life is a sense of curiosity.
I could definitely see that. And I think anybody who loves to learn, not because they have to, but for the sake of learning, I think that often goes hand in hand with that curiosity. And usually there's an element in there of openness to what you're learning if you're curious to learn always.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about being open, one of the things that comes to mind is this idea of what is your framework for looking at life? Because when I think of examples of people who I've known, and even of experiences that I've observed within myself, where it's I either am very open or very not, a lot of that seems like it's informed by the values that I've been given, the values that I've internalized, the environment that I grew up in. One of the first things that comes to mind is growing up, I grew up in a conservative Christian family. And I don't think it was ever overtly stated that yoga was a bad thing or an immoral thing based on our belief system. But there was a long period in my life where I would hear oh, somebody did yoga, and my immediate response would be oh, how could they? Why would somebody do that? And because of that, for a really long time, I was really resistant to the idea of yoga at all. And that's such a perfect example because now I'm the first person to be have you tried yoga? It's so good. It's so good for you. And that all started because somebody in my inner circle, in my family, was I started doing yoga, and you know what? It's really good. It's really helpful and healthy, and it makes a huge difference in how I feel mentally and physically.
Mm-hmm.
Which challenged me to be huh. But all of that, kind of going back to the beginning, it's that idea that when you have this fundamental attitude towards something, it negatively impacts your ability to be open to it. And it makes me think about how many things there are or there have been in life that I've probably missed out on because of that attitude towards them, where I'm no, why would somebody do that?
I'm curious too, because the other part of me that comes to mind, so it's yes, open, yes, curious, yes. And the other part of me that comes to mind is like, but not to all things.
Mm.
Like, there are some things, I don't know, and we see it. What comes to mind more nowadays is some of the rabbit holes or echo chambers we could find on the internet, you know? So, like,
What?
maybe not some of that, you know? So
Mm.
it's like, how do we stay open, but then also maybe grounded? Or I don't know, like, how do
Well,
we navigate that?
I think that there's a big difference between like openness to an experience or openness to learning something new versus openness to joining a cult. Because anything that's going to be very like cults are a great example. Cults tend to be very like we want to take everything and create a very small lane that you have to walk within.
Mm.
And usually there's a lot of like narrative in there around power and control, and like the end goal or the outcome of your life is going to be based on you walking between these two walls. I think in the beginning, usually people try and proselytize to get someone to walk down that lane by being like, you have to be open to this idea. But then as soon as you walk through the door, it's like you have to close yourself off to all other ideas.
Mm.
But I think that the idea of being open to experience, the idea of being open to trying something new, like yoga, is more about, I don't know, I think it's more about allowing yourself the freedom to try, the freedom to be curious without judging, without being critical, without being like, I am going to look stupid, or I can't do this, or I have some undefined moral reason not to do this.
So part of that too, I hear like a handful of things
Mm-hmm.
in that openness is like withholding judgment on how you feel about something for long enough to have an experience or multiple experiences with it, instead of maybe just having someone tell you about it or decide for you.
One of the more innocuous things that is a great determinant of if people are like open and curious or less so is food. If you went to a country and they were like, you know, it's a delicacy here? Semi-alive slugs. Would you like one? Would you try it?
No.
How
God,
come?
no.
But what if everybody, like all of the people who are native to there, they're like, oh my goodness, this is so good. Can I have yours if you're not going to eat it? Would you still
I'd be
not
like,
try it?
yeah, go for it. You can try it. I will say, I was slightly, I wasn't too super picky as a kid, but I was slightly picky. I didn't, and I still to this day don't love mushrooms. I don't love raw tomatoes. Those are the main two things, maybe a couple other here or there. But I did challenge myself when I lived in Europe for a little while to try things. And I didn't have to like them. I didn't have to keep eating them. I didn't have to take big portions, but to just be like, yeah, I will try a little bit. Who knows? So I did end up trying like blood sausage and all sorts of different stuff in Spain, and escargot. I tried all sorts of things. I tried to be open. Caviar, like whatever was around, for the most part. I was like, I will try. And I do have, I think, like you're talking about, based on my experiences growing up in this country, in my family and things, I know that in like Asia and I think India, like insects are a much more utilized source of protein. I know that I would have a difficult time getting over the hump of like my American way of thinking about insects. I may try an insect if it was fried. Like I know they have fried crickets and they put seasonings on them and stuff. I might try that. But I do not think I would try a live slug or a half alive slug. That would be probably the part that stops me, is any kind of movement or livingness to it. What about you? Would you try?
I, at this point in my life, I live by the mantra, I will try anything once.
Okay.
Doesn't mean I'll enjoy it. Doesn't mean it'll be great. But I'll still try it. And if I were there and they were like, this is a delicacy. We all eat it. It won't kill you. I'd give it a try. I
Okay.
don't I don't know that I would go into that experience thinking I'm going to love this and it's going to be my new favorite food.
Mhm.
I don't know that I would appreciate it as the delicacy they might.
Yeah.
But hey, I won't hate on it until I give it a shot.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of value though in like doing what you described there, where it's like I know that I don't necessarily like these things, but
Mhm.
I'm going to try. I'm going to challenge myself to get a little bit uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And I think that's particularly relevant if we move into talking about therapy and being open to the experience of processing, the experience of working through things,
Mhm.
the experience of confronting that which is really uncomfortable. You have to be open to it in order really almost to get anything out of it.
Mhm. Yeah. And being uncomfortable, I think too, part of that process is learning that being uncomfortable is not unsafe
Mm.
in most situations. Like
Ooh.
being out of your comfort zone is okay.
That is a really good point, and I had a reaction there because
Mhm.
one of the things that trauma does, like when you've experienced trauma, you very rarely feel safe, or there are a lot of situations where you feel very unsafe.
Mhm.
And that's one of the reasons that one of the long-term impacts of trauma, especially if you don't work to process it, is kind of this rigidity and lack of openness to experiences that could be potentially harmful.
Mhm.
Which I should clarify something there because of how that sounded as I was saying it. It's not like trauma doesn't make it so that you're not open to situations you shouldn't get into because they are potentially harmful. It's that it makes situations that are not harmful appear as though they could be threatening or harmful. And so you
Mhm.
avoid things that could actually be really healthy.
How do we overcome that? How do we, because it's some of us have more openness by maybe by birth, by nature. Some of us more by nurture, by our family and culture and things that way. And we have a lot of ability to choose and cultivate a sense of openness. How might we do that?
There was a TikTok, start of every great sentence. There was a TikTok like a year or two ago of this guy who was learning to like salted black licorice. And he started out the series by saying like our palates are inherently biased towards keeping us from eating anything toxic. And so things that are bitter, things that are sour, things like there are all these categories of food that we usually inherently dislike. And it's because a lot of things that are toxic to us fit into those flavor profiles.
Mm.
But if you repeatedly expose yourself to something, you can actually overcome that initial gut reaction of like, this is disgusting. Like the first time he put a salted black licorice in his mouth, he spit it out.
Mhm.
But if you give yourself exposure to something enough, you can actually get to the point where it's like I think after like several dozen exposures across a long period of time, he got to the point where he was like, I can actually enjoy this. Like I like the flavor of this, and I can appreciate kind of
Hmm.
the nuanced nature of eating something like that.
Hmm.
And I'm not necessarily trying to advocate for the idea of exposure therapy as like this is the venue for how you should become open to new things. But also, it's really important to acknowledge that when you're trying to become open to something, you you probably might not enjoy it the first time.
Hmm.
Like if you're trying to enter into a therapeutic process in order to process some trauma or heal something, it's going to be really uncomfortable, particularly at first. And so not only I think do you need to be open to the experience of exploring, you have to be open to the fact that it will get really uncomfortable at first.
One of the things that comes to mind as you say that, and that also comes to mind as I think of a lot of my clients,
Mm.
is this sense of self doubt
Mm.
and not having a trust in themselves that they can handle like a discomfort or something new or a challenge or is that something you notice too?
Yeah, that actually the thing that the thing that feels most poignant with is my kids. Like when
Mm.
I watch my kids try and do things, each of them are so different in how they respond to that gap between never having tried before and being good at something. Because
Mm.
that gap starts with a lot of discomfort and a lot of being really bad at things.
Mhm.
And sometimes there's the response of like, I try it once, I fall off the bike, and I'm like, this is stupid, I'm never doing it again.
Mhm.
And sometimes there's the, I fell off the bike, okay, I have to figure out how to not fall off the bike next time. So let's try
Mhm.
this again, let's try this again, let's try this again.
Yeah.
And there's a huge difference. There's a huge difference in how someone responds to that when they have confidence that they can figure it out versus when
Mhm.
they're like, nope, I am defeated.
Yeah.
So in answer to that, yes, and I see it a ton in my children because every kid is different, and even within my two older kids, who I see this a lot, they have very different understandings of their own capabilities,
Mhm.
and they will respond to the same trying something new completely differently because of that.
Part of me is thinking about my own experiences in that and how I've shifted over the years. Because I used to not want to do anything I wasn't really, really good at, um, and good at pretty immediately. Or if I was compared to someone else, like I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. But then over the last handful of years, one of like my values that I've become more aware of is perseverance and being willing to get it wrong, but to focus my energy on the fact that I continue to show up, that I continue to try, instead of necessarily on the outcome.
One of the things that came up as you were saying that is the idea of how important humility is to the process of being open.
That was something I also became connected with, or came up for me, and that like willingness to not know, um, which I also kind of in a way connect to a sense of trust, that it's okay to not know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing that comes up a lot in my sessions and has been coming up lately, is this desire and like effort to control things and really difficult time letting themselves like not know, which is interesting that these are like all kind of connected.
That makes so much sense though,
Yeah.
because one of the it's like if you study why people find a lot of comfort in very rigid systems of thinking, it's because there's a lot of security in knowing. There's a lot of comfort in having this black and white ideology that makes it so that you're like, yes, there is a path and I'm walking on it. I'm not lost in the woods.
Yeah.
And when you venture out into, this is actually a really interesting thing that's out there. One of the things that puts someone at risk for becoming radicalized is if they come from a very like rigid religion or a rigid way of thinking and they leave that, what they know and what they've always known is that rigid way of being, and that primes them for entering a radicalized place because they find comfort in that way of being. And so there's this piece of it where it's like we're always going to be drawn to environments that feel comfortable, and one of the things that makes them comfortable is when they're familiar.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And yeah, it's
Yeah.
especially if you've had this kind of like drifting from that idea, but like especially if you've had some sort of trauma, if you've had something that negatively impacted you that was outside of your control, one of the most common responses to that is, how do I create a life that's so in my control that won't happen again?
Yeah. And yeah, it does make so much sense. And one of the things that's been fascinating for me to learn through like a functional behavior analysis a little bit too is the mind, like sometimes anxiety or the worrying is even the function of that is like that I feel like I'm doing something. And so that feels like that's in my control, that I can think about it, that I can reflect on it, that I can try and figure it out. Like it gives my brain something to do so that it doesn't sit in that sense of uncertainty or unknown.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Yeah.
It sounds almost like it brings back some of like a feeling of agency.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which,
yet at the same time, like, so we have that, a little bit of that feeling, but at the same time, like, the more that we cling to control, the less
mm-hmm,
in control of our lives we actually end up, because we end up
mm-hmm,
closing them down, getting really rigid, losing maybe relationships or friends, not going to things that we care about or matter because there's some sense of uncertainty of how that's going to go. Like, so it's
mm-hmm.
interesting that the way the mind tries to find control, and then what actually we experience when we do that don't match up.
Mm. I was chuckling
Yeah.
because I've gone to the beach a lot recently, and getting to the beach is a nightmare. Being at the beach is a delight, and leaving the beach is a nightmare with kids. All of that with kids.
Mhm.
And it's so funny because the whole point of going to the beach with kids is fun. Like, we're not going if it's not supposed to be fun. Why would we go get all sandy and hot and sweaty and salty if it's not fun? And yet I have found myself in the last 2 weeks with my kids getting to this point at times when we're trying to do this where I'm like, let's go, let's get in the car. Like, come on, we have to do this. And then we go to the beach and we're having so much fun. And then when it's time to leave, it's like, okay, get the sand off of you. We're going to try and walk from the water to the car without being sandy. And of course they don't, because they're small children. And then I'm getting frustrated because I have in my mind this rigid idea of like, this is how it's going to be. Let's go. and it ruins it. Like, the experience of being there was fun, but when I look back, what I think about is how frustrated I got and how sad that is. Instead of just being like, yeah, we're going to have this experience. I need to be open to all parts of this experience. I need to be open to the fact that when I go to the beach with children, everything will get sandy. I gotta accept that instead of fighting it, because when you fight it, it just, that's what I thought about.
Well, and I love that too, because that is in our control. Like that struggling with it, trying to change it, trying to control it, versus allowing it, accepting it to be what it is. And that changes the experience very much. Like you're saying, what you looked back on and what you remembered was that frustration and the sadness that shows up with that. And what does it feel like when you accept that? And you're like, yeah, that's how it is. Like, how does that feel different? One of the things that I think is important to think about here too is how our culture impacts this. And to realize some of the science behind it a little bit. So what I see in our culture, through my experiences as a kid and growing up in the United States in Idaho, is that our culture seems to kind of devalue play and imagination and mysticism, and more highly value like rigid science. And I'm not saying that either one is good or bad. I think they both are helpful and useful in some places and others. But when we devalue one and we just look at the other one, we cut ourselves off from a lot of that experience. And that's part of, I think, where a lot of our closed-mindedness to different things comes from in the US. Like you're talking about with yoga. There was a lot of rigidity and closed-offness to mindfulness or meditation because it came from a different culture, was interpreted as a different religion and seen, and still is in a lot of places, but it's changing now. But so that's where we're like, this is the thing, this is the religion, or this is the way. And I think our culture had says like science is the way, instead of saying science is part of the way and these other things here too. So now we do have more science to help us understand some of these other effects, which I think can help us open to it because that's our worldview. Here is that science is kind of how we say, yeah, it's valid or not. And one of those effects is like the placebo nocebo effect. So, Jacob, have you heard of this? Do you want to describe it?
Yeah. The, I mean, placebos and nocebos are one of the best examples of the fact that we're not powerless here. Like that the attitude that we have towards what we're experiencing changes the experience of it. Because a placebo is the effect that, or it's the name of the effect where if you believe something is going to work, it's more likely to work, or the impact of it will be greater. One of the arenas where that term is often used is when you're doing like drug or medical testing, where they will give people a placebo, where it's a fake pill that doesn't actually do anything, and tell them that it will, and then they'll give other people the real pill and see what the difference is, like see how differently they impact them. Because if you tell people this is going to do something, then you get to determine like how much of the impact is based on just people believing it versus how much is actually based on the pill. Either way, point is, placebo is if you believe it will work, it will, versus a nocebo is the inverse. If you believe that it won't work, then it will actually make it less likely to work. And that's huge when it comes to our attitudes about things like mindfulness or yoga or Reiki, where when you believe that it won't be valuable, when you believe that it won't work, you do it and you're like, this is stupid. I'm just wasting my time, and now I'm more tense, and now I'm more frustrated, and now I'm less centered. That's such a great example of why the way that we think about what we're doing matters. And it's not just all in our heads, which is the crazy part.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things when you were saying too, like placebo does affect things like Reiki, yoga, mindfulness, but then it also affects even medical science. And like if you go to a doctor and you don't trust the doctor, or you don't think that what they're doing is going to work, it also impacts you there. Similarly, and I don't know if we've mentioned this on it before, but it's like if you're eating a donut and you're thinking about how bad that donut is for you, your body digests that differently than if you're saying, what a treat, I love this is really enjoyable, great donut today, your body digests that differently.
Yep. It produces different enzymes. Yeah. It's crazy.
It is.
It's wild. Anyway.
But it's also so cool and so magical and so much, so empowering in my opinion, because we have so much control there. Of choosing how we want to see something, what we want to say to ourselves as we're eating, or and it does take practice. It's not just a flip of a switch, but it's like, can I be willing to practice? There's that like humility. Can I be willing for this to be uncomfortable for a little while, or to not know if I'm doing it right, or to be curious about what actually feels different or shows up. One
of the things that came to mind, like talking about that and being open and being flexible versus like the idea of like the US culture and the rigidity to the science. Albert Einstein, who is quite a character, in his biography though, there's this part where he talks, or it's remembered in his biography, that he would say that a true scientist is always open to new information. And that to be a true scientist, you have to be willing to allow your opinion or your belief or your conviction to change based on new information.
Yeah.
And that's part of what's so interesting about a more rigid worldview, is that science only matters as long as it reaffirms what's already believed. Because as soon as the science starts saying things that don't align with the beliefs that are supposedly rooted in science, then we stop trusting science. Like right now, if you look at the US and you look at people who are supporting some certain characters that are saying things like autism is a terrible thing, like if you hand someone who's like, yes, I believe everything RFK says and vaccines cause autism and like it's all a conspiracy, when you look at people who believe that, if you hand them empirically validated science information, they're like, well, this is not true. This is a lie. This is all meant to deceive you. And I'm trying to remember where I was going with this, because I'm trying not to hate too much on that, because I get it. Like when you There are a lot of psychological reasons, a lot of which we've already even talked about today, where it's like, yeah, once you're headed in that direction, it's hard to stop.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to have compassion for that because, yeah, humans.
Mm-hmm.
But also trying to hold space for humility and openness rather than rigidity matters so much. I feel like I got on a soapbox and then forgot where I was going. And here we are.
Yeah, but I totally agree with you. And one of the things that I found fascinating as I grow up is being able to look back at different times in history where our worldview as people was completely different, where we did think the earth was flat. And that was the common dominant worldview of the time. And then this one guy was like, guys, I don't think it is. And he was outcast. They're like, nah, bro, we already know. We did like, and this has happened many, many times, because new information comes in, and we're like, no, we're comfortable here. We've organized our lives around this information, so it's not new. It's not, and I think that's cool because it gives us a space for new information to come about, for us to learn and change and grow. I remember too when way back, I don't even know, 2008 or something, where one of the politicians of the time had changed their mind, and they were called a flip-flopper. And it was like, but if they had new information, wouldn't it be reasonable and good for them to change their mind based on now knowing something different? Like, and in my mind too, that gives us so much space because it's like at this point in time, whatever I did, what was going on, what was happening was based on the information I had. And I can learn something different. I can take in new information and I can change. And I don't have to hold myself to or shame myself for not knowing better at the time or not doing differently at the time, because there's space for me to change and grow and do something differently now. And how do we do that? Do you have ideas?
Yes, this gets there, but also it's just a very funny thing that came to mind as you were talking about it. One of the ways that you can, like, if you're trying to figure out, am I closed-minded or open-minded to things, I think it's worth asking yourself, are the things that I believe, like, are there obvious plot holes in the things that I believe? A great example, believing the earth is flat. Back when people believed the earth was flat, they believed that if you sailed to the edge, you'd fall off, right? In order to fall off, water would have to be falling off too, right? Why is the ocean not going down? Like, if we believe the earth is flat, what is beneath it that is supplying it with infinite water for it to always be falling off the edge? Never thought about that before. Thinking about it now. And the reason there's not a good answer to it is because it doesn't make sense. And a lot of really rigid arguments have plot holes in them like that. Where if you truly allow yourself to think about it, it's like, well, I don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah.
And that's uncomfortable because you have to actually be willing to admit, like, I don't know. Which is where we lose some of the security that comes from having a very rigid way of thinking.
One of the languaging ways that you might be able to notice this, like as you're talking about that, is noticing when you say should or supposed to, or things like that, where it's like, it's supposed to be this way, it has to be this way, it should be this way. It's like, who said that? Who gets to decide? Is it that way? Because most of the time, I don't know if there's a way anything should be. There's ways I would like it to be, 100%, and we probably all have those. But is there any specific way that things should be? And if so, why aren't they that way? If they should be that way, then why aren't they? What's stopping them, you know? But it's like, can I notice when my mind says those things and even be like, even just a little, Like, it can tap into that curiosity of like, I'm not sure.
So often, the way things should be is rooted in the person who says they should has power that they're losing if things
Mm,
aren't that way.
mm,
And like postmodernism in the idea that truth is subjective and the idea that there isn't one right way.
mm,
Often the way rigidity responds to that is like, well, then everything will be absolute lawlessness and chaos.
mm,
And it's like, well, okay, I hear you. But also, if you believe that if we have a little bit more subjective understanding of reality, that suddenly nobody's going to care about anybody else, then yes, everything will devolve.
mm,
But when you look at people and when you look at the way that people care, there will always be people who don't.
mm,
But most people are out here like trying to live their lives, trying to provide for their families, trying to get to the next day. And most people acknowledge and recognize that it feels really good to do things that are good for other people. And also if you work really hard to be like to model that, to be that person who's like, I'm working here to be altruistic towards others. Again,
mhm,
you will sometimes get taken advantage of. Not everybody will be that way.
mhm,
But so what? Like, it's not your job to police everyone.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
when you hear that it should be this way, it should be that way, often there are distinct benefits that the person who's saying that gets from it being that way.
Mm,
Like that's when I'm listening to a book called Stamped from the Beginning, which is about the history of racism and racist ideas in the West, in the US.
mm,
And for 500 years, the perpetual narrative was like, we need to always be one step ahead of anything that's going to undo the reality that we've created that enables us to like excessively benefit from someone else.
mhm.
There's a word for this that starts with an E.
I'm not coming up with it.
Exploit. There's the word.
Yes.
Like there's this whole thing where it's like we need the narrative to stay in this like mold so that we can exploit other people for our benefit, because that's how we maintain the power that we already hold.
So part of what I'm hearing too is shifting. So when, like, can I notice when my mind is judging
Mhm.
other people, and can I shift to trying to understand where other people are coming from? So that could be one way. Even just bringing more awareness to the judgments, because normally if you're judging other people, you're probably judging yourself a lot. It's like, where did that come from? Is that my voice? Is that someone else's? Where did I learn that? Can I try and understand myself or understand other people? Could be other ways to be open, to try and bring more openness.
Yeah, I think a big part of working to be open
Mhm,
is practicing having humility, practicing being like, I don't get to decide what is reality, and
mhm,
that's okay. And being willing to get uncomfortable, because it's uncomfortable to let go of some of the security and stability
mhm.
that come from having this very rigid or black and white perspective.
And there's a lot of peace and freedom and relief in not having to be responsible for everything,
It's so
too.
true.
So it's like, it can be really hard at first, and it's not going to be hard forever. Like, once you learn how to do it, it's like, wow, thank God I don't have to do that.
It's going to the beach with my kids is such a perfect metaphor for that, because
Mhm.
it's so much more fun when I'm not oppressively like must be this way on the front end and the back end.
Yeah.
It's so much more fun when it's like, hey, we're going to get there, it's going to be really fun, we're going to leave,
Mhm.
things will get sandy, that's because we went to the beach, it's okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
The whole experience is better, and that
Mhm.
so broadly generalizes to much of life.
Yeah.
It's a great sentence.
Well, I'm thinking I love these practical like languaging tools. So I'm gonna add one more that comes to mind. Um, is saying like I don't know yet. So even
Mm-hmm.
just giving yourself, it's not that you won't know forever. And maybe there are some things I do like to say sometimes, like, and the world may never know. Kind of like the lollipop. How many looks does it take? Because there are things, and there's still mystery in the world. Even as much
Mm-hmm.
as we like to say we know everything about this planet, there's way too much. And the universe, too, there's so much.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then just even being like, yet, maybe more
Mm-hmm.
information will come out, and I will get to know at some point. Um, and I don't have to know yet.
Mm-hmm.
Can be another way to create some of that space, or yeah, practice being
It's very
patient.
true.
Mhm.
It, if you've taken anything away from this today,
Mhm.
and by you, I don't just mean you, Makayla, I mean anybody listening, we hope it's a slightly more open attitude towards new information, towards change, towards growth, towards new experience, towards trying a semi-alive slug, towards going to the beach and getting sandy. Because in allowing ourselves to be more open, allowing ourselves to be more curious, allowing ourselves to try new things, like we open the door to positive things that we otherwise wouldn't get to experience. And that's not to say that every new thing will be something we want to repeat. Some of them won't,
Mhm.
but that's okay. And you'll never know unless you try. And I also, as always, because it's the internet, don't try things that are obviously going to endanger or harm you.
Yeah,
That's
definitely not. Don't do
not that.
that.
We're not talking about those things.
Yeah.
Everything else, though.
I don't know if I've mentioned this story on the podcast before, but it's really short and I think it's really helpful. It's been really helpful for me. So I'm going to tell you this story now. So, in the countryside, there's a farmer and his neighbor. And one day, a horse wanders onto the farmer's property. And the farmer's neighbor comes out and is like, "Oh my God, what good fortune you have! Free horse! Like, how cool!" And the farmer is like, "Well, who knows what is good and what is bad? We'll see." And so the next week, the farmer's son is training the horse and gets bucked off and breaks his leg. And the farmer's neighbor once again comes out and is like, "Oh, what bad fortune you have. Your son's broken his leg. You can't help around the farm. It's terrible." And the farmer once again is like, "Well, who knows what is good and what is bad? We'll see." So a couple weeks go by and a war is broken out in the country and the army comes to get all the young eligible men. And the farmer's son can't go because he has a broken leg. And the neighbor once again comes out and says, "Oh, what good fortune you have. Your son has broken his leg and so he can't fight in the war. He'll be safe." And the farmer once again says, "Well, who knows what is good and what is bad? We'll see."
Mm-hmm.
So even just saying, keeping that in mind and saying, "We'll see." That's another piece of like that yet kind of language effect. But it's like, maybe we don't have to judge or evaluate this right now. Maybe we can allow it to shift or change or grow or be different than what we can see it as right now. And I wanted to bring that up partially too because looking at history, so we're going through kind of a, not kind of, but a rough time in history right now. But looking back at history too, these kinds of things have happened before. Really rough periods of history. And then it's followed generally by a period of growth and prosperity or change that is generally better for a people. So, can we keep that in mind right now too? Of like, not that this is good or bad, and we don't even have to use that language, but that this is really tough right now. This is really difficult. And we don't know what's next. It could be something that is better for all of us. Maybe this is that discomfort that we need to feel to be able to get to that next. So can we hold a little space? Not use as much evaluative language, a little more descriptive language would be my, yeah. Just had to bring that in because it's just so helpful for me. So wanted to share it.
And on that note, thank you for being here. Thank you for making it to the end.
Yes.
If you have any thoughts you'd want to share in the comments, feel free to do so. If you have things you want us to talk about in future episodes, feel free to do so. Otherwise, Makayla, do you want to end us?
Thank you all so much for being here and listening. We're so grateful. And yeah, we'll see you next time on The Spaceport with Makayla and Jacob.
Nice.